Hello Year 9, welcome to another lesson on an Inspector Calls with me, Miss Lex. Today we're focusing on the first half of Act 3 and we're going to be exploring the character of Eric and the Inspector's final speech. So on the right hand side you can see what we're going to be doing this lesson. So we're going to do the Do Now, which is always a review of the previous week's work. We're going to read the start of Act 3, which is available on Teams. We're going to look at the chain of events, so what caused Eva Smith to end her life. Then we'll explore the character of Eric, and finally we will look at the Inspector's final speech before he leaves. So that's our plan of action for today. The first thing I would like you to do is to go onto Teams and complete the weekly Retrieval quiz. Now, those of you that haven't really been participating in it because you're like, oh, more work. No, you are wrong. It'll take you about 3 minutes. It's 10 questions and it's multiple choice. It could not be simpler. So you literally go through, read the questions, and it'll be stuff that you know because it's based on the reading. It's nothing too challenging like, how does Priestley present the character of Gerald? No, it's like, where did Gerald meet Daisy Renton? And they'll give you a list of 4 options. I've made it super quick, and it's not really to test you. It's more to give me an understanding of how much you remember from the week before because it'll inform my teaching. So it gives me some tips on how I can do these videos a little bit better. So if you haven't been doing these, please do it now. It really won't take you long, I promise. So pause the video now, do that weekly Retrieval quiz. Okay, before we move on to the tasks, the next thing you're going to need to do is to read the start of Act 3. And you should be able to access this on Teams under Assignments or Files. So it's just pages 50 to 56. And make sure that you are exploring it in a little bit of detail. So don't just skim read it, really take it in. The play's not particularly long, but you are going to need to know this stuff for year 10 and 11. So read the start of Act 3, pause the video here, and then come back when you're done. Okay, before we start looking at the tasks, I've just screenshotted a couple of examples of people's work. I think with this whole working from home business, it's quite hard to motivate yourself. It's quite hard to know what the teacher expects. So I thought I'd give you some examples of students' work. So you can see on the left-hand side from last week's work, this student has literally done the subheading, which I've put on my PowerPoint, and then they've answered the questions. That's all I'm expecting from you. I don't need pages and pages of work, but they've just simply answered the questions so that they've got the notes there. And if you're working on a computer, this student has done the same thing. They've just written out the question and then responded underneath. So when I say upload your work, all I want to know is that you've understood what I'm asking you to do. It's not a test. It's not to see if you're writing me pages of information. It's just so that you've got a reminder of this stuff because you are going to need it. Okay, so we're going to move on to the tasks now. First thing I would like you to do today in terms of written work is exploring the chain of events. So Eva Smith's suicide is as a result of other people's actions. So we need to look at where the chain starts and who is responsible for its terrible conclusion. So you can either do it in these weird bubbles. I actually wouldn't do it like this, so I have no idea why I created this in the first place. Or you might just want to do it in bullet points. But it's a way of consolidating your understanding of the events in the play. So if you're feeling pretty motivated, you could be really detailed. You could even find some quotes to support your ideas. If you're thinking, I'm not feeling particularly motivated this week, then make sure you do this even if it is the bare minimum. So I've started you off. So the orphaned Eva Smith moves from the country to the town of Brumley. She gets a job at Berlin's factory and she's good at her job. She's sacked because she asked for more money. Then she's unemployed for 2 months. She's poor and hungry. Then she gets a job at Millward's. So you're basically rewording the story and you're simplifying it. Over here, I've got this kind of slightly more aesthetically pleasing flowchart, and I've given you page numbers for each character's involvement in case you haven't necessarily taken the best notes so far, But if you go back and look through the play, it's all available on Teams, then you should be able to access exactly what happens. Failing that, Google it. Every school does an inspector calls pretty much in the country, so there's loads of resources online at GCSE Bite Size, Spark Ranks, etc. So a chain of events, what happens in the play? So this should probably take you about 15 minutes, I'd say. So pause the tape now, come back when you've done it. Okay, we're going to explore one of the extracts in a little bit more depth. So, as we know, Eric is the father of the child, and the way that Eric and Eva met was, again, Eva was at the Palace Bar, but we kind of get the impression that Eric forced himself on her. He says, I insisted, it seems, I was in a mood where a man can cause a row. So we get the impression that the first time that they slept together, it wasn't entirely consensual. So Eric is remorseful for his actions, but we might argue that his involvement in Eva Smith's death could be the worst yet, because obviously it's implied that he raped her. But that's not the part we're going to focus on right now. We're going to focus on the family dynamics here and how the inspector contrasts that. And I'll do my cringy little thing where I read it out to you, because I know you just miss the sound of my voice so much. So when Berling discovers that Eric has been stealing money to give to Eva Smith, he loses the plot a little bit. He's furious. You'll notice that in this extract, at the beginning, Berling isn't really fussed that some girl's killed herself, but his grandchild has also been killed as a result, like the unborn baby. He's just concerned about the money that Eric stole and getting it back, really. So he says, you must give me a list of those accounts. I've got to cover this up as soon as I can. You damned fool, why didn't you come to me when you found yourself in this mess? And Eric says, you're not the kind of father a chap could go to when he's in trouble, that's why. Berling says, don't talk to me like that. Your trouble is you've been spoilt. And my trouble is that I haven't much time. You'll be able to divide the responsibility between you when I've gone. Just one last question, that's all. The girl discovered that this money you were giving her was stolen, didn't she? Yes, that was the worst of it all. She wouldn't take any more, and she didn't want to see me again. Here, but how do you know that? Did she tell you? No, she told me nothing. I never spoke to her. She told Mother. Sheila! Well, he has to know. She told you? Did she come here? But then she couldn't have done. She didn't even know I lived here. What happened? Mrs. Berling just shakes her head and doesn't reply. And Eric says, come on, don't just look like that. Tell me, what happened? And the inspector says, I'll tell you. She went to your mother's committee for help after she'd done with you. Your mother refused that help. And Eric, nearly at breaking point, says, then you killed her. She came to you to protect me and you turned her away. Yes, and you killed her. And the child she'd have had too. My child. Your own grandchild. You killed them both. Damn you. Damn you. She says, no, Eric, please. I didn't know. I didn't understand. And Eric, almost threatening her, says, you don't understand anything. You never did. You never even tried. You... And Sheila says, Eric, don't. And Berling, you hysterical young fool, get back or I'll... And the inspector says, stop. So, your first task, summarise what's happening in this part of the scene. And again, you can pause the tape in between these questions. So basically, in your own words, what is happening in this extract that I've just read in an amazing way to you. Secondly, look at the inspector's stage directions. I'd like you to analyse them. What do they tell us about his character? So you've got him cutting in here, and you've got him talking with calm authority. And to me, that suggests, even though the Berlings are getting increasingly emotional, increasingly hysterical, they're arguing, the inspector still has control. He is still orchestrating what is happening. And again, that calm authority, and at the bottom here, taking charge masterfully. It doesn't say that he's shouting. It doesn't say that he's speaking particularly loudly. He just has this kind of calm, authoritative manner that you don't want to mess with. And finally, what do the dashes in Eric's speech suggest about the way he is feeling? So we're looking particularly here. You've got all these dashes, and for us it shows Erica is most emotional. He's not said a huge amount really. He was quite calm and ashamed when he was recounting his involvement with the inspector. But now, it says in the stage directions, he's nearly at breaking point. He's so emotional, he's so angry, he's so upset, he can't really communicate his feelings. And the dashes show how upset he is. So you know if you're talking to someone and they're crying or they're really upset, they can't really form coherent sentences. It's quite disjointed. So for us, it shows us how emotional Eric is at this point. So make sure you write your responses, pause the tape here if you want, and then we'll move on to the inspector's final speech before he leaves. Okay, so if you remember nothing else about this play, this speech will get you through everything because it pretty much summarises Priestley's message. And it's quite easy to remember. The inspector uses loads of persuasive devices, so it makes it easier for us to recall. And he says this: "But just remember this, one Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths still left with us, with their lives, their hopes and fears, their suffering and chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives, what we think and say and do. We don't live alone. We are members of one body. We are responsible for each other. And I tell you that the time will soon come when if men will not learn that lesson, they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Good night." And that's the last thing he says. He leaves. So, I've kind of given you two options here. This kind of breaks down the speech a little bit more, so I'll go through this. But if you're feeling fairly confident and you're in need of a bit of a challenge, I'd like you to write a response to the following question. So how does the inspector persuade his audience to listen to his ideas? So you're going to make sure that you have a clear topic sentence for each paragraph, an embedded quote for each paragraph, reference to a technique, and analysis. And remember, your analysis should always be the most detailed bit. So consider the impact on the audience, what the writer's intentions were. So why did he have the inspector say this? And if you're feeling extra fancy, you're going to link it to the context as well. If you are going for this one, it still might be worth using these for some of your ideas, and I'm going to talk through those now. So, question 1. What are the inspector's and Priestley's beliefs about responsibility based on this speech? And the idea here is that we are responsible for everyone else, and everything we do has an impact on other people, so we need to take far more responsibility. Question 2, why does Priestley use such common names? So he says Eva Smith and he says John Smith, and that is because he is trying to talk about the entire working class here. He's saying, yeah, so this all happened to Eva Smith, but actually this sort of thing is happening to working class people everywhere. So it makes it easier for us to understand. Thirdly, what could Fire and Blood and Anguish refer to? So remember, the play is set in 1912, but it's actually performed first in 1945. So here the inspector, it could be referring to the 2 world wars. So in 1912, he's saying, if men don't learn that lesson, they'll learn it in Fire and Blood and Anguish. And he's almost foreshadowing those horrendous world wars that are going to take place. The other interpretation could be linking to hell. So if men don't learn that lesson, they'll end up in hell, like Fire, Blood and Anguish. So 2 interpretations there. You might think of a third, which is excellent. Question 4. Who's the inspector and Priestley speaking to here? So the obvious answer is the Burling family. But remember, Priestley is using the inspector as a mouthpiece for his own views. So Priestley is almost addressing the entire audience that's watching the play. And remember, in 1945, the type of people that are likely to see a play performed are probably reasonably wealthy middle-class people. So Priestley is using the inspector to address them and to try to get them to listen to his ideas. Question 5. How does this speech contrast with Burling's speech in Act 1 right before the inspector arrives? So in this speech by the inspector, he's talking about how we are all responsible for one another, we need to be less selfish, we're members of one body. And if you cast your mind back to the beginning, before the inspector even arrives, I think it's probably page 10, Burling's talking about community and all that nonsense. Some people talk like we're bees mixed up in a hive. So he's basically he's saying the exact opposite to the inspector. So Burling thinks that we shouldn't be responsible for one another, a man's got to look after himself, whereas the inspector's saying actually we are one society and we all need to be responsible for one another. And finally, why has Priestley chosen this speech as the inspector's final words? And it's to have a lasting impact on the audience. This is our final memory of the inspector. We don't see him again, so it has such a dramatic impact. And I think Priestley's hope here is that we all listen to the message and we take it on board. Remember his kind of socialist ideology. So he's hoping that we listen to the inspector's message and his message. Okay, so pause it if you need to catch up with your little responses. But one final thing, we hate Class Notebook. It's horrendous. I can't work it out, and there are too many like little subfolders. Not okay with it. So everything now is done via assignments, which is much easier. It means that when you submit your work, like those examples I gave earlier, there's a little box for me on the right hand side and I can give you feedback, and it's way quicker. So if you have any questions about anything I've said today, please do drop me an email, or you can use Teams. But hopefully you are all well. I'm recording this on Friday and it's totally miserable, so fingers crossed by Monday the weather improves a little bit. Take care, I miss seeing your faces. Goodbye.